Let's start the second paragraph, please. I'm going to read inside and I'm going to move on. Rabbi Yeshua. Shlita. With an aleph and with a hey. Yadua, it is known, look inside. Bitte.
What does the hey mean?
Shlita with an aleph means that you should live. Shlita with a hey means that you have control over yourself. Like me'ech shalta lalev. And Shlita means that the Rebbe has Shlita. The Rebbe has control. When you say the Rebbe Shlita, he's control over me, which means I do what he says.
You say typical butter.
Says the Rebbe, v'yadua, it is known, the mitzvahs, shefa, b'kavanoso, richnis, v'yanachu. The spirituality of shefa is shubha. Meaning, even though we know that there's three inyanim in shefa, the mitzvah of shefa, the inyan atzmi of shefa, and the inyan of tshuva, the Rebbe chooses to focus on the idea of tshuva, which is what we called in the last couple of shurim a mitzvah klaus, a general mitzvah, or I like to call it a super mitzvah. V'zehu, here, take mine. V'zehu inyan hatkiya rishoyna. That is the significance of the first cry of the shofar. Shu b'chinas taika b'kel posha is crying out with a simple voice. Shezeh, and the crying out with a simple voice is mitzad ha'yisoyredus, because of an awakening. V'hispoilus pnimi. Hispoilus means a reaction that comes from the soul. Hispoilus means reaction. Now, usually reactions come from the mind. My brain knows, my heart feels. Here we have hispoilus pnimi, a reaction that's coming from an neshama. How could something coming from a neshama be a reaction? And the answer is the neshama is reacting to the Eibishter or to the Aveira. Shebenefesh in the neshama, Shebabi is galus, which shows itself and reveals itself. Bekel posha dafka in a simple voice. When you have emotions, it says in Sfarim, and it's brought. It says really in Zohar, but it's brought also in Chassidus. That when you have emotions, they come out in your mouth. Your heart comes out in words. What you feel in your heart comes out in words. It says in Chassidus that koil, which means voice, koil comes from the leif. Everybody knows that voice comes from the lungs, not from the heart. But in Zohar it says, in Chassidus brings, that the voice comes from the heart. So why would the Zohar say that the voice comes from the heart when everybody knows that voice comes from the lungs? The answer is because when you feel, you emote, you express those emotions. And you express those emotions in words, and you sound. So now here's the deal.
So then it really comes from the brain.
It comes from the brain,
Down
to the heart,
to the
mouth. Right, and it comes out in words. Sound, in
Speech
its
or
sound.
voice?
Voice, koil. Koil is eish ma'im ruach, emet. Now, it depends on what kind of idea, triggered what kind of emotion, that transcends in what kind of a feeling, which is going to determine what kind of voice. Most voice that comes out of a person has a reasonable order. If you're singing a melody, it's called chush, it's one of the senses, but the singing has an order, it has a beat, it has an order, it has an aesthetic beauty to it, and so on. And certainly when you use your mouth to speak words, the words come out coherently, reasonably, orderly, logically, human, right? I'm talking to you, I'm trying to make sense. Of course, when I'm speaking, there's also sound, there's also koil, and the koil is coming from my leiv, which comes from my moyach. So because of the certain emotional state in a person, the voice comes out with words. But that only works if the voice is expressing the outer heart. If the voice is expressing the outer heart comes from the mind. The outer heart, which comes from the mind, since the mind is limited, the heart is limited, the voice is limited, that voice comes out in limited words, coherent words. But when the voice is coming from pnimi halev, the voice is coming from the inner heart, and the inner heart doesn't come from the mind. The inner heart comes from the neshama. The neshama's voice is so powerful that it can't carry words. To give you an example, which I like to give, could you blow and speak at the same time? Could you let all your air out of your lungs at once and speak words? It's impossible. If you want to speak words, you have to temper the amount of air. When you ran a marathon or you're hyperventilating for some other reason, and there's too much air coming out of your lungs, you cannot speak. Because in order to be able to speak, you have to limit the heart and limit the hevel alev, the air coming out of the heart, in what's called koil, in voice. Pnimis halev, the inner heart, which comes from the soul, comes out Like the air button on an accordion. You know, all the air. So it cannot carry words. And it can't carry a melody either. Because that's orderly and limited and reasonable and logical and beautiful.
Is this referring to shofar?
Yes, it can carry a cry. A cry! Because a cry isn't beautiful, a cry isn't reasonable, and a cry is not divided up into pieces like a sentence of words. It's a pure cry of the neshama, and that's the pshat keila shofar. It comes from the pnimis halev. And of course, we discussed last class.
It's still limited.
We're talking about the shofar means. I'm talking about the shofar physically. What does the shofar mean? The shofar means a cry that's coming from pnimis halev. The Rebbe says that there is the tkiya. The tkiya is compared to an audible sound. It's a cry, but at least you can hear it. Then there's the shvarim trua, which is kol pnima lo shtam. It's such a deep voice you can't even hear it. And as I explained to you in the last class, the second tkiya is already Hashem's answer. We scream audibly and inaudibly, and the Eibush responds right away. That's shofar. So shofar comes from pnimis halev. Shofar comes from the neshama, and it comes out in a cry, but we call it tshuva. The cry of shofar has to do with the fact, and simple of tshuva, something is wrong. I feel or I am far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and I want to change that, so I cry out. The shofar is tshuva. And it comes from the inner heart, right? Shalom bed. Shalom adat bed, right? Or shalom bed. Shalom bed. What's the difference between the outer heart and the inner heart?
The way it comes out.
Now, where it comes from.
Where it comes from. But
where does the outer heart come from?
Mind.
And the inner heart comes from the neshama, the soul. Shofar is the tshuva from the inner soul. So now the Rebbe continues. Tehine, 3 lines from the bottom. Yesh his spoilers pnimi. There's a different type of reaction that's coming from pnimius. That means from the neshama, not from the mind. The nefesh and the neshama, which is not about tshuva. What other cry does a person express? The word hispas means what emotional reaction can a person have that doesn't come from his mind? And it doesn't come from sin, which is what tshuva comes in. So it expresses the inner heart, which is the neshama, in some other way, ba'aveda, in serving Hashem, and that is Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. There's something called in Zoya, and of course the basis of it it's mentioned in Tanya, and the basis of it is in Zoya. There's something called Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. Now, if you know language of Hasidus, you know that the word will and the word heart are a contradiction. Why? Will is a mashal for Ein Seif. The heart is midas. What does the word midah mean? Measure. So the Reusa DiLiba is a dichotomy. That very phrase, the will of the heart, means that your heart, which is finite, is expressing will, which is infinite. In other words, normal emotions, regular emotions, are called midas. And what's the simple translation of the word midah? Measurement, limited. You understand? Regular emotional midas. Reusa DiLiba means my heart is revealing will. Will is stronger than the mind. So Reusa DiLiba is a paradox. It's a dichotomy. It's two opposites together. It's coming out through the heart. It's coming out in a cry. It's coming out in voice. But it's expressing something which is not midei vad, something which is not limited, expressing something which is infinite. That's the meaning of the phrase Reusa DiLiba. Reusa DiLiba is a dichotomy. The will of the heart means how the finite heart is expressing an infinite will. Now, where does Reusa DiLiba? How do you have Reusa DiLiba? How do you have Reusa DiLiba? So, of course, I don't know how you have Reusa DiLiba. I don't even know how to do tshuva. I know how to do avedis, unfortunately. How to do tshuva is a trick. Reusa DiLiba, I don't know what it is. But I'll tell you how Reusa DiLiba works. If you're Taka Chassidish Yid, a consistent Chassidish Yid, not a free nights and weekends Chassidish Yid, on occasion I show up. But if you're consistent in your Avodas Hashem, and you have a real connection to Hashem based on your own personal avodah, your own davening, your own learning, your own so on, there is always the sense that God is bigger than my relationship. Hashem is more than what I have. Why? Because my avodah, what I do, is limited by me. So when I have a relationship with the Eibishter, no matter how precise and meaningful and beautiful my relationship with the Eibishter is, it's limited. And I know it's limited. So say you're one of those really sensitive Hasidim who has a really pnimistic relationship with Hashem in the Rebbe's and Rishimis. It's called Aveda Mesudara. Organized Aveda. We don't do Aveda Mesudara. Our life is always doing tshuva. Always doing crazy things. Because we're doing crazy things not good. So we have to do crazy things good. But a person who's a Beinin, he has Aveda Mesudara. Everything is on a schedule. Everything is very precise. He serves Hashem every day and every week and every month and every year. Everything is a Daseda Mesudara. Everything is orderly. So Avodas Hashem is very established and very structured, and this person who has this very real relationship with Hashem in this very organized way knows that there's more that he doesn't have. So sometimes this person wants that more. Wanting that more is called Hispailas Pnimi, and wanting that more is called Reusa DiLiba. In other words, not people like us. I call it the revolving door of tshuva. We do tshuva 3 times a day, like people who fast between meals. The tshuva between Avedas. I don't mean to be sarcastic. I really don't mean to be sarcastic. It's to some extent it's the sad truth. But if people are consistent in Avodah, mamish consistent in Avodah, they serve Hashem using all their faculties, their mind, their heart, their senses, their time, their wealth, their body. Everything about them is engaged with Hashem. It's very beautiful. It's very deep. But it is limited. And they know it. So if you have a very meaningful relationship with Hashem and you recognize the limitations of your Avodas Hashem, there is a hunger for what you don't have. That hunger for what you don't have doesn't come from Aveda. You haven't sinned. That hunger doesn't come by itself. That hunger comes from your avodah. I'm working. And I am one of those rare individuals, and of course, unfortunately, I cannot say I and mean myself. Real, sincere, emes the people who are consistent in their avodas Hashem are getting close to Hashem every day. Beseidim is in organized fashion, and they have this hunger that they want more. And that hunger sometimes exceeds their avodah. I'm serving Hashem and I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm reaching a certain plateau. I'm going to use a bad word. In Chabad, we don't like this word, but it's the right word to use. Shleimus. I'm trying to achieve a shleimus, a wholeness, a perfection. We had a balabas here, who you may remember. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel HaKohen Blau. Rabbi Blau was the Menal here for many years. He's still officially the Menal, but he's the Tater. His Zayde, his name was Chaim Moshe HaKohen. We have over here Kastel. Kastel is named after his Elter Zayde, Rabbi Blau. Rabbi Blau was a Midah Talmud from the Midah Yeshiva, Mestagdish Yeshiva, but the Mamer is the best. The best not only in Lomdus and in Teda, but the best in Yiras Shamayim. They were very frum.
He's talking about his father?
Rabbi Kastel's mother's, Rabbi Kastel's father's mother's father. Rabbi Blau's grandfather. He knew him as a child. He knew him. He's gone.
So they're cousins.
They're cousins, right? Rabbi Blau is the same generation as this boy's father. In other words, they're the third generation. The Mirei Bacharim have made the status also. They're fine people. They're Litvische. They don't have Chassidus, but they're. I once told them Misnagid that Rabbi Avigdor Miller was a very Chassidish Yid. He got so upset. Avigdor was a big Misnagid, but he was like a Chassidish Yid. He had a lot of Avos Yisrael, and he didn't have any hatred, and he was Mekar of Yidden. So I told him, it's a big, how are we Chassid? He was one of us. He was on our team. I said, yeah, he was on your team, but he was a Chassid. So I got to concede, he was a Chassid. So the Midah had those properties. So he was a Midah, Rabbi Blau. And his brother-in-law was Rabbi Chadakov. I don't know if Rabbi Chadakov learned the Midah. Rabbi Chadakov was the Rebbe's secretary. And that's how we know him. Rabbi Chadakov, in his own right, was a Gadol. He was a very great man. He was an incredibly frum person. He was very, very learned, and he was pious. Rabbi Chadakov was one of those Jews who measured every second of his day and night. Didn't waste a minute. He was always learning and dying. He was a really earnest Jew. So Rabbi Blau Jr. told me that his grandfather went into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he said to the Frierdiker Rebbe this expression, my Shvagid, it was 3 brothers-in-law. The third brother-in-law was Harav Dev Yehuda Shachatz from Toronto, the father of the Shachatz. So he told the Rebbe, my brother-in-law, Rabbi Chadakov, has a certain shleimus. That was the expression used, shleimus. This is a term that Misnagdim use. The emes is I reading a book down Kutz. Kutz also use the expression shleimus. Chassidim don't like the expression shleimus because it's not about becoming whole. It's about becoming broken. In other words, a whole is limited. To open yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to be vulnerable. But this is the expression that he used. My shvager, Mordechai, Isaac, Chadakov has a certain shleimus that I want. And Rabbi Blau said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, how can I have that shleimus? And the Frierdiker Rebbe told him, you should learn Chassidus. Rabbi Blau was a Lubavitcher. He was an Adam Gadol. He was famous Adam Gadol. He was a Chassid of the Rebbe. With such bittul for the Rebbe, you have no idea. He had such subservience to the Rebbe, you have no idea. But he was in his own right a great man. And he uses the expression shleimus. That if I told you a maise, which I wanted to tell, and I got an opportunity to repeat it. The point of it is, when you achieve shleimus, what comes next? Avraham Avinu achieved shleimus, what comes next? Transcendence. You go past the shleimus. But how can you go past the human glass ceiling? You're a person. You have a body. And your functions are based on your mind and your heart and your scientific consciousness. More than your brain you don't have. The brain is the best you got. So if a human being maximizes his brain, maximizes his heart, maximizes his senses, maximizes his body, maximizes his time, maximizes his wealth, and everything is serving Hashem, so where do you go from here? Where do you go from here? Okay, that's the logical, but it's a disappointment. Thank God I don't have that problem, But it says in Sfarim, Avraham Avinu reached that madrega. So historically, traditionally, the answer to this question would be Nevuah. Nevuah is transcendence. Hashem gives it to you. You do your shleimus, and when you reach your plateau, the Eibush gives you Nevuah. Yes, but wait, Nevuah doesn't happen nowadays. Come on. Rebbe is a Navi, but Nevuah is manazeh is very rare. They don't have all the conditions of Man Bayis Rishon. There were Nevi'im like today you have Rashi Yeshivas. More. Like you have today Kollel Yogalite. There were many Nevi'im. The Nevuah is very rare. So what happens to a person who reaches that shleimus is he ends up with a want. That want is, I have reached till here. This is what I'm able to do using the koiches, the chushim, and the faculties that the Eibush gave me. And when you reach that plateau, you're hungry for more. That hunger is called the will of the heart. That hunger is called Reusa DiLiba. The transcendence. It's in my heart. It's limited. But what my heart is expressing is not something limited. My heart is expressing will. So that's also a cry. It's also a cry. You listening? It's also a voice without words. Because what did I tell you? Voice comes from the heart. But in order for the voice of the heart to come out in words, the voice has to be a limited voice, which means it has to express the limited heart. What's the limited heart? The outer heart, the heart that comes from the mind. But if my voice is expressing my inner heart, not the heart that comes from my mind, but the heart that comes from my soul, it doesn't have any words. We learned in the first 3 lines about the Teshuva. Teshuva means I sinned, and I'm far away from the Eibishter. And the Teshuva calls out his spilus pniimi, a reaction that comes not from my brain, but a reaction that comes from my neshama. That I want to have a connection to the Eibishter. Says the Rabbi, there's an alternative, another possibility. And that's a person who's not a sinner at all. That's a person who's achieved the shleimus. And his shleimus makes him want the transcendence of that shleimus. And the transcendence of that shleimus is called Reusa DiLiba. So let's see what the Rebbe has to say about this. 3 lines from the bottom of page Aleph. Dehine. Yesh b'chirus pniimi. There's another form of reaction from the inner soul as opposed to from the outer soul, which is ba'aved the Reusa DiLiba. When I'm serving the Eibishter with the will of the heart, okay, ba'avoisa b'Reusa DiLiba, to serving Hashem, your heart, which is limited, is expressing will, which is unlimited. So now, here's the interesting question. When you do tshuva, and you express his spilus pniimi, how does it come out? A cry, a raw cry, a wordless cry, an incoherent cry. It's not melodic. It's not like it's not a trumpet. It's a shofar. It cries. What about the person who's the shalem? He's achieved shleimus, and he's trying to transcend that shleimus to something more, and he has, quote, his spilus pniimi. Ba'aveda de Reusa DiLiba. Look at the next words. Look at the next words. That cry is quiet. Now, what does quiescence sound like? That's a great word in English. That means quietness. Yeah, quiescence. What is the concept of quiescence? When you think of the idea of being quiet, you think of a person who's in control. When I'm within myself, I'm quiet. When I'm without myself, if I'm beyond me, then I'm cuckoo. Now, Reusa DiLiba is me being cuckoo. Not in the sense of sin, but in the sense of desiring transcendence. I've achieved the shleimus. I've come to a certain plateau within the parameters of the mind, heart, and senses God gave me. Quote, I have achieved perfection, which I can't even relate to. But then just one generation ago, people used the word shleimus, and it was truth. People did not waste that accounting of every minute of the day and night. It's not normal. It's real serious yidden. A lot of them were very stuck, very rigid. That's how they did it. But they would serve the Hashem every minute of every day. And the result of that is a spoilus nishpimi. The neshama reacts with the arousal, with the wind of the heart. I want more. How could that come out quiet? It's hysterical. It's desperate. It's passionate. It's hungry. How does it come out quiet? When you do tshuva, you cry. And everybody understands why you cry. You cry because you're in pain. The Rabbi used to speak about different issues that were on his mind. In the 1970s and early 80s, the Rabbi used to scream about it. The Rabbi would scream by Fabring. And then the Rabbi would say, Asatu tvei shreitmen. When it hurts, you scream. People didn't like the fact that it was screaming. It was unbecoming, such a deep intellectual, such a holy man is acting in such an undignified way. And the Rebbe used to say, Asatu tvei shreitmen. So how could a person who's seeking transcendence cry out quietly? It doesn't make any sense. Let's read why. Ukamai avayis hakoyanim. It's at the service of the koyanim. Because it says in the Zayah, the kana, the koyanim bu'uv, the takashev Hashem, but Reusa DiLiba. Reusa DiLiba means what? Does anybody remember how did I translate Reusa DiLiba? What does that mean? That the heart, which is a limited tool, expresses will, which is infinity. So koyanim are serving Hashem b'uvda b'Reusa DiLiba. In other words, a koyan is within himself, yet what he's doing, it has a property, has an aspect, has a quality of infinity. Shehi b'chashoyi. And the koyan's avoid is quiet. Leviyim make noise, they sing. Koyanim serve Hashem quietly ki yadua. So the shaila is, if a person is crying out from the infinity of his soul, how does it come out quiet? You know what the answer to that question is? This is fascinating. The answer to that question is
it like shock? Like when people like lose somebody sometimes they like
no. It's an interesting answer, but I don't think that that's the correct pshat. The pshat is this. Two English words, right? Fluidity and friction. You understand the words? Fluidity and friction? They produce energy. They produce energy, right? Electricity. How do they produce electricity? In many ways. You can use waves, you can use the sun, you can use fossil fuels. There's a lot of ways. You can use a turbine which is being spun by a water mill, a windmill, all kinds of different ways that you can produce energy, right? The biggest problem with energy is that you can't store it. The biggest problem with electricity, the difference in electricity and oil you can put in a tank. Electricity you can keep in a battery. Batteries don't hold that much electricity. To build batteries that can hold electricity of substantial amounts would be the size of a city, and they'd be very, like your little thing over there, likely to blow up. So wait. So what's the trick with electricity? If you're in the Mojave Desert in California, where you have plenty of sun, and you can put out all the reflectors that you want, and you can drop all the electric heat, right? What's the problem?
transporting it.
You have to send it to the city of the people through a wire. But as it goes through the wire, you lose it. It's called friction. Why? Because the wire is not a perfect conductor of electricity. So if you use cheap wires, they get very hot. Like if you use aluminum, because it's a very, very poor. It'll send the electricity, but for every watt that you create, a half a watt or a third of a watt or a quarter of a watt will arrive in LA, and it becomes so expensive it's not worth it. That's why they're using petroleum. That's why they're still making electricity using chemicals that are destroying the world. Fossil fuels are not good. Oil and coal and natural gas, they're really not good. And at some point, we're all going to say, I can't believe you once used it. Now we all say, who are those Mishagoyim who say that we should put solar panels on our roof? But not far in the future, once the technology becomes available and the ability to produce energy becomes cheaper, there's going to become a point that we're going to be using sun for energy and waves for energy and wind for energy. It's going to be cheaper and it's going to be cleaner and it's going to be renewable. We're not running out of wind. We're running out of oil, not running out of wind. So why are we using oil? Because oil is cheaper it's cheaper to create a kilowatt of electricity using oil than to create a kilowatt of electricity using the sun, because you have to deliver it. So there's many tricks that they're trying to come up with. One is to create better batteries. I once read about it years and years ago. Another is to create better wires, right? Fiber optics.
I heard they want to use the tide also.
Whatever, fine, but that's only the energy. Now you have to. There's so many different ways to create energy. You have no idea. That are all renewable and they're all clean. What's fiber optics? Wires made of glass. I don't understand the technology.
They use them, right?
But yeah, but they when they deliver energy, you lose much less. What's the best conductor of electricity? The best? A wire made of gold. Only problem is gold is it's expensive, but that's not the problem. This push is not enough gold.
You'd have wires coming down
Yeah. When they send a rocket out of space, the wires are made of gold. They're incredibly efficient conductors of electricity. So the two English words you want to use is friction versus fluidity. When it's not perfect, the wire gets hot. And the less perfect the wire is, the hotter the wire gets, which means the more electricity you're losing in transport. When the wire is a better conductor of electricity, the wire gets less hot or not hot at all, and then the same amount of electricity that you created in the desert shows up in the city, and then the energy becomes cheaper and becomes more manageable, and then you're encouraged to stop using fossil fuels and to start using these clean energy sources. That makes sense, right? So now, how do you explain that in Avodas Hashem? If I am an intermittent Beinani, I'm a Beinani in 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And in between, let's not discuss it. So I have good moments. But because I also have bad moments, my good moments are hard. Think about concentration. Maybe you don't know how to concentrate, but you can imagine a concentration. If a guy is sitting concentrated, every 10 minutes you have to give him a zets in the head. And there's nothing he can do. He can't get angry at you, he can't hit you, he can't call your mother. That's life, he's stuck. So to start again. Every zets interrupts his concentration. He's going to concentrate for 9 minutes and 30 seconds between zetzes. But could you imagine if he concentrated for an hour without you interrupting him? It wouldn't just be without 6 interruptions. It would be a much better concentration. Could you imagine if he never interrupted? It'll almost become easy. That's called fluid. That's what a Beinani is. What a Beinani is not just that he doesn't sin, but because he doesn't sin, his avodah has a fluidity. The problem with the Baal Teshuva is that he's always starting over. And each time he starts over, the whole rev up the engines again. So there's a lot of waste of energy. It's friction. I know for myself. I was in the hospital Shabbos last 2 weeks for whatever personal reasons. And I sit down to learn. My wife is sitting there, I sit down to learn. My brain doesn't work. I slept. I ate, maybe a little too much, which is my Achilles heel. Food is my Achilles heel. And the words are dancing. It took me several hours to actually, I'm going to use a bad word, to enjoy the learning. That means I was there. Why? Something disrupted my concentration. Obviously, I'm not in my own home, I'm not in normal conditions. Everything around me is weird. There's noise from the hallway from all kinds of people coming and going. So it's not only that I didn't learn as much, it has a lesser quality. But if you have optimum concentration, you can be in a state where it's fluid, it's easy. So the argument is this. When a Baal Teshuva cries out, and his cry comes out in noise, why does the cry come out in noise? Why does the Baal Teshuva's cry come out in noise? Because of the friction. Baal Teshuva has a spineless pniimi. He's responding not to his brain, but to his neshama. But the hispilus pniimi is a reaction to sin, to a real obstacle to Avodas Hashem. So he cries. So before we said, why do you cry? Because it's more than the brain can hold, so you cry. So the Rebbe says, but think about this. Imagine you're a Beinani. And as a result of that, you have a fluidity in your avodah, less friction. Only tzaddikim gemurim have zero friction. That your goof should not interfere with your neshama, you need to be a rebbe. But Beinim have much less friction than we do. Because there's a fluidity in their lives, they do it better and they do it easier. And when this person has this hispailus pniimi, which is called the Reusa DiLiba, his inner heart is crying out, I achieved a certain shleimus, I have to transcend it. He cries out quietly. Why? Because the real reason for the audible cry is not that the fact that it's bigger than your brain, it's the fact that there's a fight inside you, the friction. So the Rebbe says, I want to present you with two versions of hispailus pniimi. I want to present you with two ideas of a person screaming, and it's not coming from his heart that comes from his brain. It's coming from his heart that comes straight from his soul. But one guy is screaming hysterically, and the other guy is making no sound. The one who's screaming hysterically is because there's so much friction in him that there's no other way for the voice to come out. The one who's screaming in silence, he's engaged in transcendence. He's trying to go beyond his mind. But he's so fluid, he's so perfect within his mind that even when he's going past it, it also comes out quietly. That's the pshat koyanim b'chashoy Reusa DiLiba. Koyanim serve Hashem with quiescence. Koyanim are supposed to go beyond their brain. It's Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. And they do it quietly. Why? Because there's a presumption that koyanim are tzaddikim. And the avodah is fluid. So even though they're screaming from a level of the neshama which is beyond their brain, it comes out quiet. And that's what the Rebbe just told us. So the Rebbe says, V'kan, last line of page up. Here, in our Mamer, we were learning about Teshuva, hu b'tzaka sakel dafka, the voice is out loud. Please look inside. V'huwinyan Teshuva, which is Teshuva. But the Reusa DiLiba, which is a similar cry, it comes from the same level of the neshama, but it comes out quiet. Kishneyam, the two of them, now we're going to make a shachayona and turn the page. You have a different page now, it's a different shturas adaf.
You have a different...
Right, so you have to find the place. You have a few lines to the bottom of the page. Kishneyam, because both of them in bechinas hispailus pniimi denefesh. Right, hispailus means reaction. Pniimi means it's not coming from the brain, it's coming from the soul. Both Teshuva and Reusa DiLiba is a cry that comes from the inner person, from the outer person. I'm reading on Omnam Chalukim Hema Binyanam. There's a very big difference in the idea, in the form, in the process of these two things. Why? And I'm reading right here. To see the Reusa DiLiba, if a person, and again I'm using these words, has achieved the shleimus, and he has an urgency to transcend that shleimus, and the urgency to transcend that shleimus is called Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. Says the Rebbe, Sibas HaYispoilus HaMitad HaKiruv. The reason for his reaction, the reason for his crying out, is because he's already so close. He has a shleimus. But his shleimus has a limit. And his cry is to transcend that shleimus to a higher shleimus. So his position in relation with the Eibishter, he's close to Hashem, but he's crying out because he knows that there is closer and he's not there. But the motivation for the cry is how close he is. He has a shleimus. He wants more. Look inside. V'hainu, in other words, mitzad hergish heirein seif shemargish benafshe. This person feels godliness in his neshama. And he feels godliness in his neshama because he's a Hasidic Yid. V'hu, when it comes from kishem is beinin, when he contemplates. B'bchinas atzmas ein sof. He's a Hasidic, he's a beinani. He has a certain relationship with Hashem. And then he starts to think about the Eibishter himself. His relationship with Hashem is on a certain level. The minute he starts to think about the Eibishter himself, he has no relationship with the Eibishter himself. It's beyond his level. The biggest Hasidim, the biggest Oivdim, who are very close to godliness, when they think about God, they're disappointed. They're not close to God, they're close to our level. So when a person who's a serious servant of Hashem thinks about the Eibishter, he becomes hungry and he cries out. Let's read. This person feels the transcendence of godness in his soul. When he contemplates the level of Ein Seif, which is called Atzmos, which means as godliness exists in relationship with itself. Which is wondrous and transcendent from the world. Even this Beinani, even this Shalem cannot experience Ein Seif in his neshama. His soul is not a vessel. Lazeh, to experience transcendent godliness, that this level of light, which is Ein Seif, should radiate, should shine, should be revealed, pnimis, in a revealed way, begil, in a revealed benefit in his soul. So it makes him hungry. He realizes, I serve Hashem, I'm so involved with the Eibishter, but then I realize I'm only involved with the Eibishter linus. If I want the Eibishter without a last name, I'm far away. So he reacts. I want. But he reacts quietly. Not he reacts weakly. He reacts with the same infinity. It's Reusa DiLiba, the will of the heart. But it's quiet. You know why it's quiet? Because this person is so perfect. There's so little friction in his life, in his daily avodah, that even when he's going past his daily avodah, the frictionlessness, the fluidity remains. Look inside. And his desire to get closer to it's also desire to be going to. And for these two reasons, number one, who he is, and number two, why when it's closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which wants to be close, he cries out, but his crying out is quiet. So what did we just learn? What did I learn tonight? In the previous year we learned about Teshuva. In this year we learned about Reusa DiLiba. What they have in common, they're both Hispoilos Pnimi, from Pnimi is Alev. But Teshuva is with a rash, and Reusa DiLiba is with a quiescence. Because even though this cry is a transcendence, but when a person who has fluidity within himself transcends, the transcendence can also be quiet. Now I didn't finish. I didn't do this justice. These few lines I have to reread. So the next year we're going to continue Reusa DiLiba, and we're going to go back to Teshuva. Questions or comments? I have one comment. The people who are not here missed out.